Read that out, Wendell. That's 40 years. That's my father, Hollis Rake, 67 years old, standing at a microphone he asked for. At a retirement dinner, he asked his own friends to throw him. On the 9th of May, he is holding a green folder out over the head table, and he is putting it into another man's hands with both of his own, slowly, carefully, the way you hand somebody a baby. Then he lifts one finger and points down at the paper inside it, and he tells the man where to start. Start at 98. That's when I went out on my own. That's the part that counts. He picked the year himself. I need you to hold on to that, because everything else in this story is going to try to take it away from you. Nobody made him. Nobody in that hall even knew that folder existed until he reached under the head table, came up with it, and stood there holding it like a trophy he'd been polishing all week. My name is Delia Rake. I'm 41 years old. I've worked at Ockert Ready Mix, out on Route 9, since I was 19, and I run the payroll there now. 92 people, every hour of every one of them, twice a month. I am the person in that whole building who knows exactly what your work is worth, down to the quarter hour, because I am the one who writes it down. At 19, I started paying my father's mortgage, $611 on the first, out of a checking account that had $400 in it. Then the propane, then the county taxes, then the note on his truck. 22 years. And in 22 years, my father never once said a cruel thing to me out loud. I want that on the table early, because people always want him to be a monster, and he isn't one. And if you need him to be a monster to feel this, you'll feel the wrong thing entirely. He was warm. He was funny. He'd rest his hand on the back of my chair at a table full of people and tell them, gently, in a voice like a screen door in July, that his daughter was the one who takes. Not the one who took something once. The one who takes. Present tense. A whole category of person. He said it at my mother's funeral, 3 years ago, with a paper cup of coffee in his hand. I didn't cry at that dinner on the 9th of May. I need that out of the way now, because there's a version of this where I go down between the tables and somebody fetches me a glass of water, and it would be a better story, and it isn't the one that happened. I sat at table 4 with my hands folded in my lap. I put them there on purpose. They didn't shake. I have never quite forgiven them for that. Now here is the strangest part, so I'll go slow. There is exactly one piece of paper in this entire story. One. And it isn't mine. I never kept a record. Not one page. 22 years. And if you put me under oath tomorrow, I could not prove a single dollar of it. No ledger, no spreadsheet, no shoebox under a bed with the carbons rubber-banded by year. I have spent my whole adult life writing down what other people's work is worth, and I never wrote one number down about my own father. Because you don't invoice your father. There's no form for it. The only paper in this story came from the United States government. It came to him. It has his name on it and the seal on it, and he kept it in a green folder with a rubber band around it, in the drawer under the phone. On the 9th of May, he carried it into his own party under his arm. It's 4 pages. I'm not going to tell you what's in the second column yet. You'd just think it was a number, and it isn't a number. It's a life. So sit down across from me. Let the coffee go cold. This one runs long. And I've been trying to figure out how to tell it since May, and I'd rather not carry it by myself. This is for the nights the house is too quiet. And I think tonight, wherever you are, yours might be. If any of this is landing where you actually live, go ahead and hit the like, and subscribe if you want to keep sitting at this table with me, only if it's real. Though, I've had enough polite for one lifetime. And before I take you back, do one thing for me down in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every one of them. They're the reason I keep the light on. And then tell me one more thing. Tell me about the first bill that wasn't yours that you paid anyway. Not the 10th one, the first one. Because the first one is the only one you ever really decide. Now, let me take you back. Not far. 25 days. To a Tuesday afternoon, the 14th of April, 4:40 in the afternoon, and a man standing in my office doorway holding his hat. Wendell Pryor had never once been inside that building in his life. He's a big man gone soft at the belt. 71 years old, hands like a bag of walnuts. 38 years on the floor at the Bellamy Mill. And when they shut it down in 2011, he was one of the 4 they kept on to turn the lights off. He'd known me since I was in a car seat. He and my father have been best friends since 1971. He stood in my doorway turning that hat around by the brim, the way a man turns a hat at a wake. "Ah, deal," he said. "You got a minute for an old man?" I had a screen in front of me with 92 people's hours on it. Tomas Ruelas had run 4 hours of overtime on a pour-out at the Hadley job, and the system had kicked it. And I was fixing it. Because that is what I do. I make sure the hours a man works are the hours a man gets paid for. It is the only thing I have ever been completely certain was right in this world. "I've got all the minutes you want. Wendell," I said. "Sit down." He didn't sit. He said, "The boys and me are throwing your dad a retirement dinner." I'll be honest about what happened in my body when he said it. Nothing happened. 22 years builds a thing in you that catches the falling object before your face even knows something fell. I said, "Oh?" "The way you say it when a man tells you the price of rebar went up." 9th of May, he said. "Saturday, I got the VFW. I got Dolores doing the roast beef. Post 3418's letting me have the hall for the cost of the cleanup. 25 days. 40 years. Deal?" He said it soft. And he meant it soft. 40 years a man works. Somebody ought to stand up and say so. And then he asked me for the thing he'd driven all the way out to Route 9 to ask me for. He'd been working up to it. I could tell he'd rehearsed it in the truck on the way over. "I need you to write it," he said. "The tribute. The highlights. You'd know him better than anybody. Being his girl, I can't hardly spell." He asked the daughter to write down her father's 40 years of work. He was smiling when he asked me. He had his hat in both hands. And I want to be careful here, because there has never been one single ounce of malice in Wendell Pryor. And that is exactly the thing that makes him dangerous. A man with no malice in him will carry anything you hand him, all the way across a crowded room, and never once think to look inside. The first day I ever worked at Ockert, Merle Ockert himself put a stack of time cards in front of me. He's 81 now, and he still comes in on Tuesdays, and he said, "Everything a person does for money, somebody writes it down. That's the only fair thing there is about it." I was 19. I thought he was talking about the time cards. I looked at Wendell standing in my doorway with his hat, and I said yes. Of course I said yes. That's the whole story. Right there. If you want it fast. I have never once in my life told a man in this county no. Nobody ever taught me the shape of the word. I said yes to Wendell Pryor at 4:40 in the afternoon. And then I sat out in that parking lot a long time with the keys in my hand and the engine off, and I could not have told you why. When I finally went back inside, Merle Ockert was at the coffee machine in his Good Tuesday cardigan, 81 years old, waiting on the pot like a man who has finally got all the time in the world and knows it. He looked at me the way he looks at a load ticket that doesn't add up. "You went white as a sheet out in that lot," he said. "Somebody die?" "Wendell's throwing my dad a retirement party. He wants me to write the tribute." Merle poured his coffee and didn't say anything for a moment. And Merle's silences have always carried more than most men's speeches. He is the one person alive who has watched me across a desk for 22 years, Who knows to the quarter hour what I'm worth? Because he's the one who signs for it. 40 years, he said finally, and there was something dry down at the bottom of it. That's the number the man's using. That's the number he's using. Merrill blew across the top of his cup. Everything a person does for money, somebody writes it down. He said, the very words he'd handed me at 19. And standing there at 41, I understood for the first time that he had never been talking about the time cards. Not then. And not now. You remember who does the writing in this outfit. You do. You've always been the one who does the writing. Delia. And he carried his coffee back to his office, and he left me holding a sentence I would not feel the full weight of for another 3 weeks. Because here is what I understood. Sitting back down at my desk with 92 people's hours still open on the screen. I had 25 days, and I had just agreed to go looking for the one thing I had spent my entire life being careful not to look at. I told myself, at first, that it was only about pictures. That's how these things start. Small. Practical. A favor. You need pictures for a thing like that. You blow them up. You glue them to foam board. You set them on easels by the coffee urn. Wendell wanted job sites. He wanted. And I am quoting him exactly. Your dad up on a machine with his shirt off. Something from the old days. So on Friday, the 17th of April, I drove out to the house on Quarry Road. My father was down at Wick's. I let myself in with my own key, a key to a house I have paid for since I was 19 and do not own one board of. The albums are in the hutch in the front room. There are 9 of them. I got down on my knees on that carpet and I went through all 9, one at a time, for an hour and 40 minutes. Here's what's in them. There's the truck. There is a great deal of the truck. There's the truck in 1998 with the sign fresh on the door, my father beside it with his arms crossed. And you can see my mother's shadow thrown across the gravel because she was the one taking the picture. There's the truck at the Bellamy 4th of July parade. There's the truck with a Christmas wreath wired to the grill. There's the backhoe on the trailer the day it was delivered, the price sticker still on the boom. There's the sign at the end of the driveway. Rake and Son Excavating. 4 separate photographs of that sign. 4 different years. Same spot. My father standing out in the road to take it. There is not one photograph of my father doing work. Not one. Not in 9 albums. Not across 28 years. No hole in the ground. No man down in a trench. No crew. No lunch cooler. No hard hat sitting on a fender. Every single picture is of a thing he owned, taken from far enough back that you can read the name painted on the side of it. There was one more thing in that hutch, on the bottom shelf, and I almost left it lying there. A job book. One of those hardbound green ledgers with the columns already printed inside, the kind a real contractor fills with dates and addresses and what he charged for the day. Rake and Son Excavating was embossed on the cover in gold letters. He'd had it made. He had spent money to have it made. I opened it on my knees. The first 3 pages have entries. 1998. 3 of them. In my father's careful hand, a driveway, a foundation dig, a culvert out on the Petrie place, with dollar amounts written next to them in round numbers. The kind of numbers you write when you are imagining a figure and not recording one. And then the 4th page is blank, and the 5th, and every single page after it. 28 years of printed columns. Empty. All the way to the back cover. 3 jobs. Maybe. Maybe even those 3 were real. Once. A quarter century ago. And then a man sat down and stopped writing. Because there was nothing left to write. And he kept the book anyway. On a shelf. Embossed in gold. The prop for a life he was going to tell instead of live. He didn't leave the mill because they did him dirty. That's the story. And this whole town believes it. And I believed it too until I was old enough to do the arithmetic. He walked out of the Bellamy Mill in 1997 with 18 years on his card, at 38 years old, because another man had made foreman and he hadn't. And he told my mother he wasn't going to spend one more day of his life making somebody else rich. In 1998, he put a sign at the end of Quarry Road and a name on a truck door. I was 13. I remember standing in that driveway with the paint smell still coming off the letters, and I asked him. I said, "Dad, who's the son?" And he laughed, and he put his hand on the back of my neck, warm as anything, and he said, "It just sounds better. Deal. Nobody hires a man on his own." Sit with a 13-year-old hearing that. Not the cruelty. There wasn't any cruelty in it. He was being practical. He was explaining business to a child. Sit with the arithmetic that child did, standing right there in the gravel, which was, there is no sun, and I am standing here, and I do not count as one. I was still on my knees on that carpet with the 9th album open when I heard the truck in the driveway. He was supposed to be at Wix. He was not at Wix. I heard the door, and I heard him drop his keys in the dish. And I did the thing I have done my whole life. I got the album squared and stacked, and I was on my feet with a normal face on before he came through into the front room. But he saw them. Of course he saw them. He stood in the doorway and looked at his 9 albums stacked on the hutch, and he smiled like a man watching his own parade come up the street. "Wendell put you up to this," he said. Pleased. So pleased. "He wants job site pictures," I said, "for the easels." And my father, warm as a kitchen, said, "Well, there's plenty. Take whatever you want." And that is the moment I did the thing I had never once done in 41 years. I don't know what got into me. Maybe it was being down on that floor for an hour and 40 minutes with the proof of it in my 2 hands. I heard my own voice come out quiet, not even unkind. "Dad, there's no pictures of you working, in any of them." The room did not get cold. I want you to understand that. Because it is the whole horror of the man. The room got warmer. He came over and he looked down at the album still open on top of the stack, at the truck and the sign and the empty gravel, and a soft, fond, faraway look came over his face, like he was seeing something beautiful that I was simply too small to see. "You never did understand what I built," he said, gently, to me, about the money I had spent since I was 19 keeping the lights on inside the thing he built. "That's all right. Deal. You count the hours. Some of us made the thing the hours go into." And right then his phone rang, and it was Wendell. And my father set it on speaker on the hutch next to the albums and said, "Wendell, she's here doing your pictures. Doing a real nice job." And Wendell's voice came out of that little speaker, delighted, filling the whole room. "Course she is. She's a good girl, always has been. You raised a giver. Hollis. Whatever anybody says." And my father looked right at me while it played, warm, and he said into the phone, "Well, she takes care of her old man. She takes care of." He turned it inside out in a single sentence. In front of the one man in this county I would have wanted to hear the truth. And he did it smiling. And Wendell laughed his big warm laugh down the line. And I stood there with my mother's shadow on the gravel in a photograph under my hand, and I said nothing. I picked out 4 pictures of a truck. I drove home. I sat in my own driveway a while before I went in. I wasn't crying. I want to be accurate about that. Because I know how much easier this would go down if I told you I cried in the car. And I didn't. I just sat there and let the engine tick and thought about how a man could look at the exact proof of a thing and see the opposite of it, and how he'd done it so easily, so warmly, with his best friend listening, that it wasn't even a lie he was telling. It was just what he saw when he looked. That's the part that scared me. Not that he was lying, that he wasn't. That was the night I stopped telling myself this was about pictures. Because here is what that phone call did. It didn't wound me. I was past being wounded on this subject a long time ago. What it did was show me the shape of the thing. My father had spent 25 years telling this town a story, and the town had learned it by heart. And the proof that it was false had been sitting in 9 albums and 1 gold-embossed empty book in his own front room the entire time, and nobody had ever looked. Because you do not check a story everybody already agrees on. I had 25 days, and 3 of them were already gone, spent on a box of photographs that proved the exact opposite of what I'd been sent for, and I still didn't have 1 true number to put in a tribute. So I want to give you the weather I grew up in. Just enough of it that you know what I was standing in, because the numbers I couldn't find weren't his. They were mine, and they had other names on them. There was the mortgage. That first default notice came in the spring of 2004, 4 months behind. $611 a month. And they wanted $2,444 of it by the 19th. It was face up in the stack of mail with the grocery coupons and a seed catalog. Because by then I was the one who opened the mail. Because my mother was working doubles and my father did not open mail. I was 19 years old. Nobody sat me down. Nobody cried at me or begged. I stood at that counter and read a piece of paper, and I did the only thing that ever occurred to me, which was fix it. There was the propane. February of 2006, the tank ran dry. My mother didn't call me. She never called me. That was the arrangement nobody ever wrote down anywhere. She just quietly stopped running the furnace. I came out on a Sunday to drop off groceries, and the house was 51 degrees. And my mother, Maureen Rake, was standing at her own stove making soup with her winter coat on, buttoned to the throat, in her own kitchen, like it was weather. Like cold in the house you live in is simply a thing that happens, the way rain happens, and not a thing a man could have prevented by paying a bill. I filled the tank that afternoon. I was 21. That coat, hold on to that coat, it comes back. And there was the truck. I told you I'd say it once and leave it alone. And then a whole room asked me about it in May, so I'll give you the truck properly. Now, so you're ready when they ask. In the fall of 2013, my father came home with a newer one, a 3/4 ton, 4 doors. The kind of truck a man buys when he wants the world to believe the work is coming in. The old one wasn't broken. He just wanted the new one. He pulled it up the driveway and laid on the horn. And my mother came out drying her hands on a dish towel. And he stood beside it with his arms crossed in the exact pose from 1998. And the next week he had the door painted himself, Rake and Son, same as ever. Same as... I was 28. The note was $430 a month. Nobody sat me down for that one either. What happened was, the payment book came to the house and went into the stack on the counter, and 1 month it didn't get paid. And there was a call from the credit union that my mother took and didn't mention. And I found the second notice the way I found all of them. Face up. Waiting. Patient as a chore with my name already on it. So I called the credit union and I gave them my account number. The same account number I had given the mortgage company and the propane company and the county. And I quietly became the thing that paid for the truck. That summer, he drove it in the Bellamy 4th of July parade with a little flag off the antenna. And I stood on the curb next to my mother. And a man I didn't know leaned over and said, "Business must be good. Hollis got himself a new rig." And my mother smiled and said, "Oh, he does all right." And I said nothing. And then I felt her hand find mine on that curb and hold it. Neither of us looked at the other. The truck went by with our money on it and his name on the door. And my mother held my hand on the curb and didn't say a word. And that is the closest the two of us ever came to saying it out loud, a hand on a curb during a parade. She knew. I need you to know that she knew, because it matters later. More than almost anything else matters. And it was in 2009, at their kitchen table, that my father said the thing I've been keeping back from you. I was 24. I was writing the county tax check. Because by then that was simply a thing that happened at that table, quietly, on Saturdays. My mother was in the front room with her sister, my Aunt Junie. My father came through with his coffee, patted the top of my head on his way past the way you'd pat a good dog, and went in to sit with the women. And through the doorway, in the softest voice that man owns, the one he uses on babies, the one with no edge on it anywhere, I heard my father say this: "Don't be hard on her. Some kids are givers and some are takers. Delia's a taker. It's not her fault. It's just how she came." He wasn't performing. That's the thing it took me 17 years to understand. There was no audience worth performing for. Just Junie. And my mother, who was his wife. And me, in the next room with a pen in my hand and his tax bill under it. He believed it. He said takers the way a man names the weather, and my Aunt Junie said nothing. And my mother, in her own front room, married to him, her winter coat still hanging by the door from 3 seasons of cold kitchens, my mother said nothing either. Remember that, not the line. I'll bring the line back. The line comes back at the worst possible moment for him, and you will be right there when it does. What I need you to hold now is the nothing. 2 women in a warm front room, and the quiet they kept. Because I used to think that quiet was cowardice. I was wrong about it. And the thing that finally showed me I was wrong was the second page of that folder. The page I'm going to tell you I didn't read. I hadn't read it yet, but I was going to. There were 18 days left, and the tribute on my screen was still only 3 sentences long, and I could not make myself write a 4th. So on Tuesday, the 21st of April, 18 days before the dinner, and I want you to hold that number, 18. I drove back out to Quarry Road to get a real number out of him. I'd decided I would write the honest version of a dishonest thing. You know the kind. The kind where every single word is technically true, and the whole of it is a lie. Hollis Rake started his own business in 1998. True. A fixture on Quarry Road for over 25 years. True. I could build the man a tribute out of nothing but facts and never once say the word that mattered, which was money, and whose it had been. For that, I needed dates. The year he started, the year the backhoe came. Numbers give a lie its good posture. My father was home this time. I'd called ahead. And when I told him what I needed, real dates, real years, something with the numbers on it, his whole face lit up. And he said the thing that put the folder in my hands. "Well, my Social Security just come," he said. "Whole records in there, every year of it. It's in the drawer under the phone. You go on and pull the big years off it for your speech." The drawer under the phone, the green folder with the rubber band around it. I want to slow all the way down here, because this is the part I have gone back over more nights than I would like to admit. I took the folder to the kitchen table. He came with me. He got himself a cup of coffee and he sat down across from me at his own table, close enough that I could hear him breathe. And he watched me slide the rubber band off with the exact pride of a man about to be read his own good report card. I opened it. It's a statement of earnings. 4 pages. Government printed. The seal in the corner. A column of years running down the left side, all the way back, and next to each year the money he had been credited for that year. And I found 1998, the year of the sign and the truck and the shirtless on a machine that never happened, The year he was so proud of that 3 weeks later, he would tell the Emcee to start there. And next to 1998, it said zero. $0.00. I looked at 1999. Zero. 2000. Zero. I did not move my face. 22 years builds that. 2. I sat at my father's kitchen table with the proof of my entire life in my 2 hands, and I held the exact face of a woman reading a phone bill, because he was 3 feet away, watching, waiting for me to hand him a big number to be proud of. "What's the top one?" he said. "The best year. Put the best year in the speech." And this is the near miss. This is the moment the whole thing could have ended right there, 18 days early, at a kitchen table, with nobody in the room but the two of us and a clock ticking on the wall. Because all he had to do was lean over, reach across 4 inches of his own table, turn the page toward himself, and look. He had never looked. This is a man who has pointed at that folder 1,000 times in my life. One finger. From a chair. Across a room. And said it's all in there. And he was right. It was all in there. And he had never once opened it. Because a man who is certain does not check. For 1 second his hand came off the coffee cup. For 1 second I was sure he was going to reach for it and turn it, and see the column of zeros marching straight down the middle of the years he was proudest of. And I felt the whole thing tilt under me like a floor. I sat still, and I let him decide. I did not slide it away. I did not close it. I want to be honest that I didn't help him toward the truth, and I didn't help him away from it either. I just held my phone bill face and let the clock on his wall tick. And I understood in that second that I had already chosen something. Days before I'd admit it. Because a woman who wanted to save him would have turned the page toward him herself. He didn't reach. He tapped the table twice with 2 fingers, the way he does, and he said, "Big number. Deal. Make me sound good." And he got up to top off a cup that was already full. Because he trusted the paper the way you trust something you have never once had a reason to doubt. The way you trust a story when you're the one who wrote it. So I gave him a number. God help me. I did. I looked him in his warm face and I said, 98 was a strong year, Dad. And it was the first lie I have ever told my father. And I told it to keep him from finding out the truth about himself. I put the rubber band back around the folder. I put the folder back in the drawer under the phone. I did not read the second page. I want you to know that. There was a second sheet clipped behind the first one. Government paper. And I did not read it. Because he came back to the table and I closed the folder and I told myself I had what I came for. I drove home with a column of 19 zeros behind my eyes. And I did not cry. And I sat in my own kitchen a long time. And I understood for the first time that the retirement dinner was not going to be a lie told about a working man. It was going to be a working man's dinner thrown for a man who had not earned a single dollar since I was 13 years old. And I was the one writing the tribute. I didn't sleep much that week. And I'm not going to pretend the not sleeping was noble. It wasn't grief. Grief, I know. Grief has a bottom to it. You fall and you land. This didn't. This was arithmetic that would not come out even. 19 years of zeros, and across those same 19 years, the mortgage and the propane and the taxes and the truck and me, standing in for the number the whole time while he told the town the number was him. I tried to write the 4th sentence. I sat at my kitchen table 4 nights running with the cursor blinking at the end of 3 true paragraphs, and every 4th sentence I typed, I deleted. Because there was no 4th true thing to say about the man's 40 years that a room full of working men could hear standing up. I typed, he built a business that. Delete. I typed, he provided for. Delete. I actually laughed out loud alone in my kitchen at that one. Provided for. And then I wasn't laughing. I typed, "He taught me the value of." And I sat and looked at that one a long time because it was the only true fourth sentence I had, and I could not finish it. Because the way he'd taught me the value of a thing was by making me pay for all of his. Here is where I have to tell you about the program, because the program is the moment I understood I could not simply, quietly, fail to write it. On the 28th of April, Wendell came by, my house this time, with a proof of the program in a manila envelope. So proud of it, he was nearly shining. He'd had them printed at the quick print out by the highway, 150 of them. Cardstock, gold border. On the front, above a photograph of the truck. The truck. Of course, the truck. It said, in letters an inch high, Hollis Rake, 40 years a working man. The boys are gonna love it, Wendell said. I got Merle Ockert coming. I got fellas driving in from the mill haven't stood in the same room since 011. Deal. I got Ray Sturgis coming up from Cannleton, and Ray's on oxygen now. He said it like the oxygen made it holy. 40 years a working man. You put the words to it, and I'll read 'em out. You just tell me where to stand. A working man. And he was going to read my words out to a room full of the real article, to Ray Sturgis on his oxygen. To men who had punched a clock for 40 actual years and had the backs and the hands to prove every one of them. And every last one of them was going to rise and lift a glass to a man who had walked off the floor in 1997 because he didn't make foreman. That's the moment it stopped being about whether I would write it. Wendell was going to stand up at that microphone on the 9th of May and honor my father in front of the only people on earth whose good opinion the man had spent his whole life quietly stealing. It was going to happen with me in the room, whether I wrote one word or none. The only question left was what would be true when it was over. And I want to stop right here and ask you something, because I know some of you are already ahead of me, and I want to hear you say it before I tell you what I did. If you have ever been the reliable one, the one who fixed it, quietly, for years, while somebody else stood up and took the bow, then you already know exactly the trap I was in. And I want you to tell me in the comments which way you would have gone, because there were only two doors. Door 1, you warn him. You love him enough, or you fear him enough, or you're simply enough of what he raised you to be, that you take him aside before the 9th and you say, Dad, don't bring that folder. Don't stand up there. I've seen what's in it. You save him from himself. One more time. The way you've saved him 10,000 times. That's the good daughter door. And I had been walking through it since I was 19 years old. Door 2, you let him. Tell me honestly, not the answer that makes you look kind, the real one. Which door would your hand have been on? And then stay with me, because there was a third thing in that folder that I still hadn't read, and it was the thing that decided it. 4 days out, Tuesday, the 5th of May. I told my father I needed to double-check the dates for the program, which was true enough. I drove out to Quarry Road one more time. He was in his chair watching the television, and he waved me toward the phone drawer without getting up. You know where it is? He said. I took the green folder back to the kitchen table, alone this time, and I slid the rubber band off. And this time, I turned to the second page. It's a benefit notice. The government mails it clipped behind the earnings record, the two of them together, because they're two halves of the same answer. The first page is what a person put in over a lifetime. The second page is what he gets to take back out. And my father's second page says that his retirement benefit, the check he filed for this year, the check that pays for the truck now, and the propane, and the taxes, the check that a 40 years a working man earns and draws down with his head held high, is being computed on the earnings record of Marin Rake. His wife's record, my mother's. I sat very still at that table. In the front room, the television laughed at something, because his own number was too small. 19 years of zeros had dragged it down below the floor, and the only thing that lifted it back up to something a man could live on was a survivor's benefit drawn off the lifetime record of a woman who had gotten up at 4:30 in the morning for 31 years to work the floor at the county home out on Ridge Road. Doubles, whenever they'd let her. Who had made soup in her coat in a 51-degree kitchen rather than say one word about it. Who had been dead for 3 years. And who is, right now, this very month. The reason there is a check. My mother is paying his mortgage now, from the grave, off a lifetime of covered wages that nobody in this county ever once called work, because it was a woman doing it, in a building full of old people, for an hourly rate. I drove out to that county home once, when I was maybe 10. The bus dropped near there, and her shift ran late, and I was supposed to wait in the lobby. I remember watching her come down the hall at the end of a double, before she saw me. She had an old man on her arm, walking him, slow, one hand under his elbow and one flat on his back. And she was listening to whatever he was telling her like it was the most important thing anybody had said to her all day. And it almost certainly wasn't. It was probably the same thing he'd told her the day before. And when she got him to his chair, she crouched all the way down in front of it to set the brake. And she stayed down there a second, at his level, and said something that made him laugh. That crouch. That is what covered wages look like. That is what is on the record that pays my father's rent tonight. Nobody in this county ever called that crouch carrying a family. They called it a job a woman had. And they called a man sitting on a shelf beside a gold-embossed empty book building something. And there it was, the thing that undid me. Finally, on the silence. The thing that turned my mother's nothing from cowardice into something I still don't have the right word for. She had not stayed quiet because she was weak. She had stayed quiet the exact way I had. She was a giver married to a man who called giving taking. And she had learned, the way I learned, that there is no form for what we did, no line on any card where it gets written down. So she wrote it the only place a woman like her could write it. She wrote it into a government computer. One covered paycheck at a time, 31 years, and she never told him. And she knew, she had to have known, that one day the arithmetic would come due and the paper would finally say out loud the thing she never got to say on any curb. I put the second page back behind the first. I put the rubber band around the folder. I put it in the drawer under the phone. And I chose door 2. I did not warn him. I drove home and I sat down and I finally wrote the tribute. 3 short paragraphs. Every word of it true. Not one word of it a lie. And I emailed it to Wendell Pryor. And I'll tell you exactly what was in it. Because I have thought a great deal about whether it was cruel. I wrote that Hollis Rake put a sign at the end of Quarry Road in 1998, and that it is still standing. I wrote that everybody in Bramwell knows that truck. I wrote that he is a man who always made sure the whole world knew the name of the thing he built. Every word true. I sent it. And then I did the one thing I had never done in 22 years of fixing everything that came to that counter face-up. I left something broken on purpose. 4 days, then 3. Then it was the morning of the 9th of May, and my father put on his good shirt. And he reached into the drawer under the phone, and he took out the green folder to carry to his own dinner. Because a man who is certain does not check. The VFW hall out on the county road holds about 140 people, and Wendell Pryor filled it. I have run payroll for 92 men and women a long time, and I have learned the look of a room full of people who work, the careful way they fill up chairs in the good clothes they don't wear often, the men shaking hands with both hands at once. Ray Sturgis was at the front table with his oxygen bottle in a little cart beside his chair. Merle Ockert was there, 81. in a tie I had never once seen him wear to work. Men from the mill who hadn't stood in the same room since 2011 stood in that one. Dolores had done the roast beef, and you could smell it. I sat at table 4, on purpose, near the back, near the door, with a clean line of sight to the microphone. Merle Ockert caught my eye from 2 tables over. He didn't wave. He just held my look a beat longer than a man holds a look by accident. And then he let his eyes drop to the green folder tucked under my father's arm as he worked the room. And then he brought them back to me, and I understood that Merle, who has spent 60 years reading load tickets, who knows to the quarter ton the second a number's been cooked, Merle already smelled it. He didn't know what was in the folder. He knew how my father was carrying it. You don't carry proof like that. You carry a story like that. My father worked that room like a bridegroom. I have never denied him the gift. He has a real one. He put his hand on the backs of chairs. He let men buy him a drink, and under his arm, all evening, going table to table, he carried that green folder, and whenever somebody's eye caught on it, he'd pat it and wink and say, "Proof's in here. 40 years. Wendell's gonna read it out." He wanted to be checked. That's the part outsiders never believe about a man like him. He didn't only want to be honored, he wanted to be verified. In public. Out loud. From paper. Because he had told the story so many times and been believed so completely that the story had grown more real to him than the years it stood for. He had stopped remembering it as a claim. He remembered it as a fact. And you check a fact in front of everyone precisely because you are certain of it. And I want to tell you what that hour was. Sitting there. Because the dinner started at 7 and Wendell didn't get up until 8. And for that whole hour I sat at table 4 and watched my father be happy. Genuinely, simply happy. The happiest I had seen the man since before my mother died. He was among his people. They had cooked him roast beef. The proof was under his arm, and it was going to be read aloud. And he had no idea. None. And I could have ended it. That was the strange, sick center of that hour. I had the second page behind my eyes and a clear line to the microphone, and any minute inside those 60, I could have crossed that room and said, "Dad, come outside a second." I rehearsed it. I'll be honest that I rehearsed it, that some part of me stood at door 1 with my hand on the knob for that entire hour. Because 22 years does not switch off because you finally read a piece of paper. Once, in that hour, he caught my eye across the room. He was mid-laugh at something one of the mill men had said, and he found my face at table 4. And he lifted his drink an inch toward me. Not a toast. Just a small, private thing. Father to daughter. The warmth turned all the way up. He was thanking me. For the tribute. For the pictures on the easels by the coffee urn. For being there. For a whole lifetime of it. He had no idea on this earth what he was thanking me for. And I lifted mine back. An inch. I want that on the record too. Because I am not the clean hero of this the way you might want me to be. I raised my glass to my father 1 inch across a room. And I knew. And he didn't. And I let the folder stay right where it was under his arm. I didn't get up. I ate Dolores's roast beef. It was very good. Wendell got up around 8. He tapped the microphone. He'd worn a jacket, and you could still see the comb lines in his hair. "Now, some of you know I can't hardly talk in front of people." He started, and the room laughed, warm, already on his side. So I got Hollis's girl Delia to write down the important part, and I'm just going to read it, and then we're all going to eat Dolores's roast beef before it goes cold on us. And he read my 3 paragraphs, and every word of them was true. And the room murmured the way rooms do. The sign. The truck. Everybody knows that name. My father stood beside him beaming at the back wall. And then he did the thing I did not write and could not have stopped. He stepped up next to Wendell, and he reached under the head table, and he came up with the green folder, and he took the rubber band off it himself, and he held it up over his head so the gold light off the ceiling caught it, and he said, "The thing you already heard. At the very beginning of all this. Because I wanted you to hear it, before you understood it. Read that out, Wendell, that's 40 years." And he put it into Wendell's 2 hands with both of his own. "Start at 98, my father said. That's when I went out on my own. That's the part that counts." He picked the year. I need you to hold on to that one more time. Now that you know what lies under it, nobody handed him that folder. Nobody told him to say 98. He reached straight past 18 real years at the Bellamy Mill, the only years on that whole card with a single honest dollar written next to them, because those were the years he had been ashamed of. The years of making another man rich. And he laid his one finger down on the year he was proud of. Wendell Pryor put his reading glasses on. He is 71. And he does everything slowly and carefully. And he found the line my father's finger was pointing at. And he read it out to a hall full of men who had punched a clock for 4 decades. He said, 1998. And he stopped. I have thought a great deal about that stop. Wendell isn't quick. It took him a second to understand that the space next to the year had a number in it. And the number was 0. He is an honest man. And honest men assume a mistake long before they assume a lie. So he did the most Wendell thing there is. He read the next one. To correct it. To give it a fair chance. 99, he said. And his voice went strange in the middle of it. That's a 0 too. Hollis. The room didn't understand yet. My father didn't understand yet. He was still beaming at the back wall. Because in the man's own mind, Wendell was reading out 40 years of honest work. And the only sound in his head was applause that hadn't started. 2000, 0, Wendell said. 2001, 0. He looked up at his best friend of 55 years. And there was no malice in his face. There has never been 1 ounce of malice in that face. There was only a working man holding a piece of paper he couldn't make sense of. Hollis, he said. Quiet. Right into the microphone because he'd forgotten it was live. There's nothing in these. Year on year, it's all 0. Here is what a room of working men does when it understands. Nothing. At first. That is the part I was not ready for. There's no gasp. A gasp is for surprise. And this was not surprise. This was recognition. 140 people who had each punched a clock for 30 and 40 years. Who knew to the dollar what a year of a man's earnings is supposed to look like on a government page, because every one of them had read their own. Sitting there, hearing 0, and 0, and 0. And doing the private arithmetic they had all already done for themselves 100 times. I watched it move across those tables like the shadow of a cloud crossing a field. One man would go still. Then the man beside him, Ray Sturgis, up front, took the little cannula away from his face for a second. The way you take off your glasses to be sure you're reading a thing right. And Wendell kept going. Because Wendell finishes what you put in his hands. That is who he is. That is the whole reason my father chose him. Without ever once knowing that was what he was choosing him for. 02, 0, 03, 0, 04. And I heard it coming. I was the only person in that whole hall who knew it was coming. And it still went through me like cold water. 04, 0. 2004, the year of the first default notice. The year I was 19 and paid $2,444 that I did not have. So the house that photograph was taken in front of would not be taken away from him. 0. He read 19 of them. Wendell Pryor stood at that microphone and read 19 straight years of my father's life out loud to a silent hall. and every single one of them was 0. And somewhere around the 8th or the 9th, the whole room finally understood what it was hearing. And the quiet that came down over those tables was not like any quiet I have ever sat inside. A fork slid off the edge of a plate somewhere up near the front and hit the floor, and nobody bent to pick it up. My father had stopped beaming. I watched it happen to his face. Not all at once. He got all the way to that microphone, all the way down to the last 0, before he understood what he had handed across. You could see him doing, right there in front of everyone, the arithmetic he had spent 28 years never once doing. The same arithmetic a 13-year-old had done standing in a driveway. The arithmetic this whole town could have done on any ordinary day and never did. And you could watch it arrive in him. And Wendell, God love him, was not finished, because there was a second page. He turned to it looking for the 40 years, looking for the part that counts. He was still trying to save his friend, still certain there had to be a mistake somewhere. And he read the top of the second page the same way he'd read the first, out loud, into the microphone, before he could understand it either. Benefits to be paid. Wendell read slowly, on the record of, and there he stopped. And he looked at it, and he looked up, and he looked for me. Across that whole silent hall, Wendell Pryor found my face at table 4, because I was the one who would have known, and he finished the sentence looking straight at me and not at my father. On the record of Marin Rake, and a voice from one of the middle tables. I never did find out whose. One of the millmen, older, said the thing out loud that the whole room had already arrived at. Not cruel, just the arithmetic finally coming out even, in public, after 28 years. Then who paid for the truck, Hollis? I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I have never needed to. And that has always been the one thing I had. I sat at table 4 with my hands folded in my lap, and I let the question hang there in the gold light, and I did not answer it, because it was not mine to answer. It was his. Every eye in that hall had already left me and gone to him. And for the first time in my entire life, I was not the one everybody was waiting on. And my father, and this is the part I would have told you could not happen. If I had not sat there and watched it happen, my father did not confess, even then, even there. He took the folder back out of Wendell's hands, gently, and he closed it, and he found me across the room, and in that soft voice, that screen door voice, the one with no edge on it anywhere, in front of every working man he had ever lied to. My father said it. She always did take everything I had. The one who takes. He said it one more time. He reached, standing there at the very bottom of it, in the wreckage of his own dinner, for the same thing he'd reached for at my mother's funeral with a paper cup in his hand, because it was the only tool the man had ever owned, and he did not know how to be inside a room without it in his grip. But it does not work in a full room the way it works through a doorway, to Junie, over a tax bill. It lands in a hall where a piece of government paper has just been read out loud, where Ray Sturgis is sitting on his oxygen having just heard 19 zeros counted down. It doesn't land at all. It just hangs there in the air beside the other thing, the true thing, the record of Marin Rake, and the whole room heard both sentences at the very same instant, and understood. Finally, all of them together. Which one of the two people in this story had ever taken anything? Nobody said amen to him. Nobody in that county ever will again. Wendell set the folder down on the head table like it had gone hot in his hands. He did not look at his friend of 55 years. He took his reading glasses off, folded them, put them in his shirt pocket, and he stepped down off the little riser. And he walked the whole length of that silent hall, past every table, and he came to table 4, and he put one big walnut hand on my shoulder, and he said, in front of every soul in the room, the only word he had, "Deal!" That's all. Just my name. The name Wendell's called me since I was in a car seat. But he said it the way you say a name when you are handing something back to the person it should have belonged to the entire time. My father left his own retirement dinner alone, the one he asked his friends to throw him. Dolores wrapped up the roast beef in foil for people to take home. I'm not going to dress up what came after, because the truth of it is quieter, and worse, than any downfall you could write for him. There was no lawsuit. There was nothing to sue over. He hadn't broken a single law. You are allowed to run a business that never takes a job. You are allowed to let your daughter pay your mortgage. You are allowed to file for your dead wife's survivor benefit. All of it legal. Every dollar. That's the part it took me longest to sit with. He never did one illegal thing in his life. He just did 28 years of the other kind of wrong, the kind there is no form for. And then he stood up in a hall and asked to have it read aloud. What happened is smaller than a lawsuit, and it will last far longer. The story died. 25 years of a story, the one where Hollis Rake carried this family, the one where his daughter never worked a day. It died in that hall in about 4 minutes. In front of the exact 140 people it had been built over a lifetime to impress. And a story that dies in front of the people it was for does not come back. Men who used to buy him a drink at Wick's started being somewhere else the moment he came in. The phone calls to the house stopped. Ray Sturgis died that August, on his oxygen, and my father was not asked to the funeral of a man he had known 50 years. And he understood exactly why he wasn't. And that is a specific kind of cold that no amount of propane will ever fix. Wendell came out to see me about a week after. He stood in my doorway again, turning his hat by the brim again, except this time he wasn't at a wake. He was at the other thing, the thing after a wake, where you have to decide how to go on living next to what you now know. He said. I read it out. Deal. I stood up there, and I read it out with my own mouth. And I told him the truth, which is that he was the only honest man in that room, that a dishonest man would have seen it coming on page 1 and closed the folder and covered for his friend, and that the reason the truth got out was that Wendell Pryor finishes what you put in his hands. He didn't take much comfort from it, but he took some. He comes by on Tuesdays now, some Tuesdays, and sits with Merle and me at lunch, and we don't talk about it, and that is its own kind of amen. Merle Ockert said exactly one thing to me about it, and only one. The Tuesday after. He stopped at my desk on his way past, the way he does, and he didn't sit down. He said, You wrote it down after all. I told him I hadn't. I said the government wrote it. I just didn't stop it from being read out loud. And Merle looked at me a second, and he said, No, you've been writing it down your whole life. Delia, you just never once sent the invoice. And he carried his coffee on into his office. 81 years old. He is the only person who ever saw it while it was still happening, and he waited 22 years to tell me he had. My father called me twice. I want to be honest about the calls. The first time he left a message, and the message said, Your mother would be ashamed of you tonight. And even then, I noticed that he reached for my mother to do the work of it, the way he always reached for one of us to carry the weight of his own sentence. Because the man has never once in his life held his own weight inside a single line. The second time, about a week after that, he didn't leave a message, just his name on the screen, and then nothing. And I stood in my kitchen and I watched the phone ring, and I did the second impossible thing I had learned that spring. I let it. And if you've come this far with me, then you already know I am not going to sit here and tell you I got the house. I didn't get the house. It is still his name on the deed of a place I have paid for since I was 19. And it is going to stay his name. And I have made my peace with a thing I'll say one time and then leave alone. I never once did it for the house. Some of you want the ending where the deed changes hands. And I understand the wanting. But the deed was never the debt. The debt was the word. He took the word giver off of 2 women and kept it for himself for 25 years. And on the 9th of May, a piece of paper he carried in under his own arm handed it back. Before I take you to the last of it, the quiet part, the part that is really why I told you any of this, do the thing for me. If you have ever fixed it silently for somebody who then stood up and told the whole room they carried you, hit the like so the next person it happened to can find their way to this table. And share it with the one person who will know exactly who you mean before you even say the name. And then ask yourself the question that room asked my father, in your family, in your own life. Who paid for the truck? You already know the answer. You have always known it. Most people just never once get to hear it said out loud. Here's the quiet part. On the 1st of June, a Monday, the mortgage came due the way it has come due on the 1st of every month since I was 19 years old. $611. For 22 years, my body has known that date the way it knows to pull a hand back off a stove. On the last day of every May, I have moved that money, without thinking, without deciding. The way you don't decide to catch a falling glass. Your hand is just already there. I sat at my own kitchen table on the 31st of May, with the checkbook open and the light going down outside the window, and I did not move the money. That's it. That's the whole revenge, if you want to call it that. And I don't. There was no triumph in it. There was only a woman at a table not doing, for the first time in her life, the one thing she had always done. And it was the single hardest thing in this entire story, harder than the haul, harder than letting the phone ring twice, because paying had been my proof, as long as I paid. I got to be right about myself. I got to be the giver in a house full of people who called me the opposite. Stopping meant trusting that the paper had already said it, that the record of Marin Rake had said it for both of us, and that I would not have to keep saying it with my own money for the rest of my life. I closed the checkbook, and then I spent money on the one thing I did decide to spend it on. My mother's headstone, out at Ridgelawn, says Marin Rake, beloved wife. He picked it. Of course he picked it. 2 words for the woman, and one of the 2 is his. There is nothing on that stone about 31 years at the county home. Nothing about the doubles. Nothing about the coat in the 51-degree kitchen. Or the 4:30 alarms. Or the crouch in the hallway to set the brake on an old man's chair. Or the fact that she is, right now, this very month, the only reason her own husband has a roof over his head. When every last soul in this county said Hollis carried that family. The paper says it was her, quietly, one covered paycheck at a time, for 3 decades, and then for 3 more years after they put her in the ground. So I took the $611 I did not send my father, and I sent it instead to a man down in Cannleton who cut stone, and I had him add 1 line to my mother's marker. Under beloved wife. Just 1. I thought about it for a long time, and in the end I didn't get fancy with it. It says, she paid for everything. And it's true. It is the truest thing in this whole story. And there is not a form anywhere in the world it would fit on. So I put it on granite instead, where it will outlast the deed and the truck and the man and me. I kept her coat. It is the one thing of hers I have. I keep it on a hook by my own door. In a house I heat to 71 degrees without ever once thinking about the bill. And some mornings when the house is too quiet, I put it on to make the coffee. And it still doesn't fit me. And I wear it anyway. The first morning I put it on, the 1st of June. I stood at my own warm stove in my dead mother's coat and made coffee I didn't need to make, in a kitchen that was 71 degrees, and I understood something I had somehow gone 41 years without noticing. I had spent my whole life keeping other people warm, and I had never once known I was cold. That is not a thing you get to go back and fix. It is just a thing you finally get to know. People always ask if I forgave him. They always ask that one. So let me answer it the honest way. The only way I have left. I didn't forgive him. I stopped paying to be hated. Those are not the same thing, and I spent 41 years mixing them up. Blood was supposed to be the one thing you couldn't put down. But blood, it turns out, was just the account number he had on me. The people who actually carried this family were never the ones who shared his. They were the two women who kept the real ledger in the one place he'd never think to look. And one of them is on a stone now. And one of them is sitting here telling you this. And I promise you that neither of us ever took one thing in her life. My Aunt Junie was at that table in 2009, you'll remember. She heard him say it. And she kept the nothing too. All those years. And Junie and I have some accounting still to do about the quiet she chose. But that's a stone I haven't cut yet. Another night. Maybe. If you want it. If any of this found the place where you actually live tonight, then come back and sit with me again. The chair's here. The light stays on. And if there is a bill on your table right now that was never yours to begin with, the first one. The one you are just about to decide. I hope you sit with it a good while before you pick up the pen. Doors, not walls. Same chair next time.